My name is Dr. Ian Storch. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and osteopathic physician, and you are listening to Do or Do Not. If you're interested in joining our team or have suggestions or comments, please contact us at doordonotpodcast.com. Share our link with your friends and like us on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you enjoy this episode.
My name is Benjamin Berg. I am a pre-medical student currently applying to osteopathic medical schools for the 2023-2024 cycle, and you are listening to Do or Do Not. In today's episode, we are joined by the Dean of Touro University, California College of Osteopathic Medicine, Dr. Tami Hendriksz. In this episode, Dr. Hendriksz will shed light on what makes Touro California stand out as an academic institution, as well as what students can expect out of 4 years in Vallejo, California. Dr. Hendriksz shares her unique journey from taking time off from the medical field to discovering osteopathic medicine, rediscovering her passion, and finally coming full circle as the dean of an osteopathic medical school. We know you will love this inspiring episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Tami, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
It is my pleasure.
Awesome. So you are the dean of Touro University, California. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. And I have to tell you, and I think I told you this already, but you are definitely one of the coolest deans. And I've met a lot of really cool comm deans. I think you may be the coolest.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to work hard. That feels like a lot to live up to, but I'm going to work hard to live up to that.
No, I think that's not going to be hard for you, but I appreciate your time. So I want to just start talking to you about your comms. So when we spoke, we usually start the interview talking about what you do in your role as dean or what you do in your job. But I think when I asked you for a champion or someone to talk to about your school and you said you would do it, I think that just says a lot and it's super cool.
I love Touro. I love Touro, California specifically, but I do love all the Touros, which we can touch on. I'm an alumnus of our school, and then I've been back here since 2009 working, so teaching and then moving up in administration.
Super awesome. Yeah. So tell me a little bit just generally about Touro, California and what the school does and what makes it special.
Yeah, absolutely. So Touro, California, we opened our doors in 97. So we are a fairly middle-aged comm, which means that we're really well established. We're located in the Bay Area in California. And I think that really helps to highlight some of what we are known for. As you think about Bay Area mentalities, Northern California, interests, and where that overlies and overlaps with osteopathic philosophies, principles, and practice. We are, I think, one of the only medical schools that has a program learning outcome of structural competency, which means that we're teaching our learners not only about social disparities of health and the fact that they actually exist, but we're also teaching them why they exist. What are some of the structural and systemic factors that lead to some of those disparities? And what can we do? How can we empower our learners to be able to help fight those? We, I think, similar to a lot of medical schools now, have a really strong ultrasound education. We're leaning heavily into technology. Once again, being in the Bay Area, we're set up really well to do a lot of the pretty advanced technology implications in education. I think one of the things I love most about our school is our roots go really deep into osteopathy. And so, being able to really offer that strong OMM training and have those osteopathic principles just run throughout every single one of our lectures, labs, learning sessions that we have for our students.
That sounds like so well thought out and amazing. I think when I was applying to medical school, I was just thinking like, oh, I want to be a doctor. But it sounds like there's so many intricacies that you're weaving into the education. It just sounds great.
Thank you. I'm really proud of what we're doing out here. We've got such an incredible team, such incredible people, and fabulous students.
So Tami, first of all, everybody knows California is like a cool place to live, right? So not to insult any other place in the US or any other comms, but if you had to say, like, pick a cool place that you might want to live, California is definitely going to be at the top of the list. So can you tell us a little bit about the area where the school is? Because California is a big state. I'm from New York. I don't know much about California. Tell us where the school is. Tell us what the surrounding area is like, and tell us maybe what students can expect outside of school or around school if they came to Touro, California.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So we are located in Vallejo is the city that we're located in, and then Bay Area. And Bay Area, we generally call it the San Francisco Bay Area. It's kind of from San Francisco up to Sacramento, so strongly Northern California. It is beautiful here. It's a beautiful place to live. That's why it's so expensive to live here, because we're all willing to pay those premium prices. We get the beautiful coastside with the ocean, the mountains. So there's skiing readily available right here, and everything in between. Lots of hiking, lots of just beautiful places to explore, a lot of outdoor sports, outdoor activities. Vallejo itself is a really interesting city, and it is an interesting location for the school. Our school itself is actually on an island. So talk about an even more glorious place. So we're located on a little island right in Vallejo, but I think we have some of the best sunsets in the Bay Area right here on our island. But the Vallejo community is a struggling community. There are food deserts, there are healthcare deserts. The city itself has gone bankrupt on multiple occasions. And so it really offers our students the opportunity to make some real progress and change, to make a big impact. The community here knows us very well. We're very well respected. Students will see as they're studying out in coffee shops and around the area, people come up to them, "Oh, you're from Touro. We love Touro." Our students are able to really help, whether it's with our student-run free clinic or our mobile vaccine clinics, our school-based clinic, or any of the volunteer activities. We do a lot of mentorship programs. Our students have set up some pretty fantastic advanced sex education programs for the high schools around here. And so we're able to take this community that has its challenges and to do good with it, which is, it's beautiful.
It sounds super nice. Sounds like there's a ton to do, and sounds like there are patients there who are not from Beverly Hills and actually can use some help.
Yes, absolutely.
So can you tell us, for students that maybe aren't in state or are in state and are thinking about Touro, California, is there a preference for in-state students, and what percentage are taken from out of state? And for example, if someone was from the East Coast, would that be a detriment to their application, or how do you look at students that are applying regionally?
Yeah, we welcome all students with wide open arms. So regardless of where they're from, the majority of our applicants do come from the state of California. I think California is one of the largest exporters of medical students. We just have a lot of people who want to go to medical school in our state that goes beyond the capacity of the medical schools here. So, I think this last cycle, we had 80% of our applicants came from the state of California. And so typically that's what we see in our matriculants and who we actually accept into our school. It's kind of right along those same percentages, 70 to 80% in alignment with just who's applying to our school, but no preference is given to California residents. It's just who we get coming into our doors.
And Tami, can you tell us a little bit about branch campus? So I get a little confused myself on the idea of branch campus. I know the original Touro is in New York, and there are a few branches. I believe California is one of them. Can you tell me if I'm wrong on that, or if that's correct? Right? And can you tell me what that means as far as education, and how much of the education comes from, I guess, virtual from the main campus, or how all of that works?
Yeah, absolutely. Glad. I'm happy to do so, because I think there is a lot of confusion out there about that. So Touro University System is a large system that has schools and institutions in multiple countries, in about 6 states, kind of coast to coast in the US. And those schools are everything from undergrad through graduate school. Touro started in 1970 in New York, really to provide equal opportunities for education for Jewish people in New York who weren't being offered or provided those opportunities. We were the first medical school, the first Touro medical school, so Touro University, California. We opened our branch campus, Touro University, Nevada, later on, and then Touro University, Middletown, Harlem, and now Montana have all opened as well. So those are all the comms within the system. And we have one allopathic medical school, which is New York Medical College. And what I love about it is we have 6 medical schools across our system. And so we have this ability to network, to share resources, to really get a number of amazing opportunities just because of our size, while also still being able to have unique educational experiences and perspectives at each of our schools. So each one of our schools is very different. We do all the teaching for all of our classes here on the California campus, but we are able to, if we're looking into research opportunities or clinical opportunities for our students, we are able to work across the system with that, which is pretty fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. So I totally did not understand how that worked. So if I was a student at Touro University, California, my professors would be totally different than if I went to Touro in New York. That's correct.
That is correct. Yes.
That's very cool and makes it very clear. So can you tell me what makes your comm stand out? So like if a student was thinking about applying to osteopathic school, why would Touro University, California make the top of their list? What makes them stand out among the comms?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's something that all of us deans need to be able to identify really easily, right? Is how do we distinguish ourselves? I think one of the main reason, and I always hate to say this, right? But the main reason I came here as a student was because of location. I wanted to stay in the Bay Area so I could be close to my sister who had been diagnosed with cancer, right, recently, just before I applied to medical school. And so location was kind of my number one factor. But then all the other things that I knew about Touro, and at that point, it was a really young school, but it already had a good reputation for being one of the more rigorous osteopathic schools, having some of the best board scores, having really excellent residency placement rates. And all of those things continue to be true. And really listening to its learners, which I think is one of the things that really distinguishes our school, is we have our students are involved in every single aspect. They sit on all of our committees. They participate in every single interview. As we're interviewing the new applicants, they sit on our admissions committee. So they really help to determine who we're selecting to become, the next class of future osteopathic physicians. As I mentioned, we have that program learning outcome of structural competency. So we're really focused on social justice and on helping to fight those healthcare disparities.
My follow-up question to that is, as far as going into 3rd and 4th year and going into clinical rotation. So I think most people would agree that osteopathic education is solid and on par with other systems of medicine like allopathic schools. And one of the comments sometimes is that big universities, big allopathic universities, maybe have one central hospital. And osteopathic schools sometimes lack that. And certainly being an osteopathic physician myself, I've found many positives to rotating through different hospitals and having different clinical experiences. But I think it's important for students to look at where the comms are putting their students for those 3rd and 4th year rotations. So can you tell me a little bit about where students might expect to rotate for those years?
Absolutely. We have a fairly unique system in terms of being a COM who does this, where and somebody else who would be fabulous for your podcast is our Senior Associate Dean who is running our Touro Medical Group. He is an incredible person, Dr. Dick Reamer, but he has basically propped up the Touro University Medical Group in a city in the Bay Area, so relatively close to our campus. And that medical group is really closely affiliated with a large hospital system, and we're completely integrated into it, meaning we are the academic sponsors for all of their residency programs. And they have, I think at last count, 11 residency programs, over 200, I think it's more than that, residency positions across those residency programs. And it's our faculty within that medical group that are teaching in those residency programs. And so we send about 40 to 50 of our students out to that site where they get to have that really robust, kind of classic clinical experience within those residency programs, right? So they're working with the residents and the attendings there. And then we have a number of other regional affiliates where we'll send a student to a region where we have really close connections with the graduate medical education, the residency training sites in those regions so that they get that experience as well as some of the more community experiences. We have enough clinical rotation spots for all of our students in the greater Bay Area. We do also keep a few spots in Southern California and in New York because we almost always have some students that are interested in those experiences during their third and fourth year as well. So we're still able to offer them that.
That sounds very unique, very cool. And I definitely would take you up at some point, maybe as a follow-up to this interview, to talk to that dean. I think that would be great.
Fabulous.
So I'm going to sidestep a little bit and then come back to sort of the main idea of the questions that I've been asking. I wanted to ask you, when we interviewed Gerard Balthazar, who's an amazing surgeon, who anyone listening who hasn't listened to the episode, he's what I call a hybrid DO. So he's a Rockstar trauma surgeon who also does OMM on postoperative patients and is like super cool. So he went to Touro, California. And when I interviewed him a while back, what really stuck with me was that he talked a little bit about the religious and spiritual ideas that are propagated through Touro. And specifically, I believe he's Catholic. You know, he's not Jewish. I happen to be Jewish and not religious. And it just seemed so interesting to me that it was such a point that he felt needed to be made during his interview. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I think that I mentioned, that Touro, when Touro College first opened, it was in 1970 and it was in New York, and it was specifically based on educational equities, offering education to individuals who at that time weren't able to obtain that education. And so the Judaic values run through all of our schools. And like I said, we have them worldwide and across the country, kind of coast to coast. And those Judaic values of treating everybody with integrity and respect, kind of underlying values of social justice, those personal, professional ethics. It's a fantastic part, and I think a key connector of all of our Touro schools. And it does link beautifully with the osteopathic principles and practices. So it's a pretty incredible synergistic complement. It's really nice. Our students experience it certainly just through the philosophies and how all of us kind of live our lives and treat one another. But they also get to get out of school on Fridays at 3:00, right? So we observe. And so for any students who are observant, they don't have to worry about asking special permission to be able to take the high holy days off or anything like that. Those holidays are already granted, right? And so it means our students who aren't practicing get those holidays off as well, whether that's extra study time or time for them to be able to spend with their family. Our kitchens across our campuses are all kosher kitchens, so the food is healthy and delicious and fresh made on site.
That's amazing. And interestingly, I think the interview with Balthazar was a number of years ago at this point, and that's exactly what he said. So that's obviously true. My last question about the school for you, Tami, is can you just talk to us a little bit, because I know this is something that appropriately students are interested in, how your match was, say, this past year. Tell us a little bit about what your match looked like, what the residencies that people got were, or, matched into were, and what location those residencies were in.
Yeah, great question. So there are three highlights of my year every year as a dean, and it's orientation, when you get to have all that energy and feel those feelings that everybody has, right, as they're coming into medical school, their match day, and then graduation. And our match, I mentioned that was one of the things that drew me to Touro, along with location, but the fact that everybody matched so well. Back when I was a student here, we didn't have one combined match. We had separate allopathic and osteopathic matches. And Touro, since its inception, has had a really high rate of individuals who match into allopathic institutions. And I think because of that, when the merger did happen, we haven't struggled at all, knock on wood, like some of the other osteopathic medical schools have when it comes to the match. So we had another exceptional match this year. We had the highest number of students ever match into this in residency programs in the state of California. California tends to be an incredibly competitive state for residency matches. And our students are almost always, we outnumber the percentage of DOs that match in California. And we have for the longest time. But this year, I think it was maybe 68% of our students matched into residency programs in California. And across all the different specialties, our focus, like most comms, we're focused on primary care. And so more than 50%, I think it was maybe 68% again, of our students matched into primary care residency programs. And then the rest, it's all the other specialties, right? From dermatology, neurosurgery, radiology, et cetera. So yeah, match is always a really fun time for us.
Spectacular. It sounds really, really exciting and great. Tami, we're going to shift gears a little bit now and talk about you, which is like really exciting for me because, like I said, we had such a nice conversation. I think if I was going to med school, I would be so excited if you were my dean. So can you tell us maybe where you grew up and where you went to college and when you decided you wanted to be a doctor?
Sure. Happily. So my family's actually from South Africa. We moved out to the States when I was 2 years old. And that'll kind of loop back around in my story a little bit. I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in Half Moon Bay, and I grew up knowing I wanted to be a physician. I specifically knew I wanted to be a pediatrician. I imagined myself living in a small town like Half Moon Bay and seeing patients from the time they were born until the time they had babies, and then I could take care of their babies. So I did everything that you do when you're pre-med. I went to UCLA for my undergrad. I chose psychobio as my major because it met all the pre-med requirements. I took my MCAT. I became an EMT. I shadowed physicians. I did everything except for apply to medical school. And that's because when it came time for me to submit my application, I reflected on all of the conversations I had with the physicians that I worked with and that I shadowed. And every single one of them told me not to go into medicine. All of them said, medicine was not worth it. It wasn't worth the time and energy. They were all really, at the time, HMOs were really taking over. They felt like they didn't have any time to spend with their patients. They were unhappy with their financial compensation. So I had a quarter life crisis as I had worked for so long to get to this place. And then here were people who were doing what I'd always dreamed of doing, and they were miserable. So I didn't apply to medical school. I ended up moving back to South Africa for a year. And then I moved back to the States. I got my emergency teaching credential, and I started teaching math and science at special education, math and science at a group home in San Francisco. And then this is going to morph into how I found osteopathy. Then my older sister was diagnosed with leukemia. She and I were my parents had moved back to South Africa while I was in undergrad. So I was in actually right before I started UCLA, my parents moved back to South Africa. So at this point, my sister and I were the only ones in the States, and she was diagnosed with leukemia. She was diagnosed on June 1st, which was the summer after my first year of teaching. And so it meant that I had the entire summer break to spend with her, which I did at her bedside. She was admitted initially, and I think she spent about 3 months in the hospital during that first stay. And I spent every day right there with her. And I realized then that, medicine wasn't just a job that I always thought that I wanted. Medicine really was a life calling. It felt like something I was called to do. I had the opportunity. She was treated at a hospital that had residents and students as well, right? So she would have this whole parade of people would come in, the surgeon followed by the residents, followed by the students. And they would all come in and rarely introduce themselves to her. And, they'd be focused on a particular lab value or a particular complaint she had. And then they'd all leave the room again. So during that time, I met a physician who asked about my sister and asked how she was doing. And I started giving her most recent blood count. I kept copious notes. That's how I coped. So I started giving her most recent blood count and what chemo she had just started. And he interrupted me and he said, "No, how's your sister doing? How's she handling this?" And I thought about it and I said, "Oh, she's doing terribly." At this point, she'd been in the hospital for 3 months. She was very depressed. She was very anxious. We didn't know anything about her type of leukemia. AML was the type she had. But we knew that almost everybody else admitted to the cancer ward with that type passed away. And so I said that she's depressed and she's anxious. He encouraged me to encourage her to get her mental health treated. He taught me that treating her mental health would probably also help with her physical health. And I said to him, after all this time in the hospital, you're the first person to ask about my sister, the person behind her disease, like the first person to actually see her humanity. Everyone else has been focused on a lab value or on, a sore that she has. And he said, "I'm a DO, and that's what we're trained to do." So to make my sister's cancer journey all about me, I had this confirmation that medicine was my life calling. And then here, this was the type of medicine I wanted to practice, osteopathic medicine. And so I applied to exclusively to osteopathic medical schools that fall. Touro, California was my number one choice. And luckily I got in, and my sister's doing fantastic now years later, which makes it easier for me to make it all about me.
I obviously have chills right now. That is a crazy story. That is crazy. And, it's so amazing that, that minute or that hour or whatever period of time you spent with that doctor, and obviously this is years and years later, but you tell the story as if you're still there in that moment, and that person was so impactful and it was such a turning point in your life, right? It's just like a fork in the road.
Yes, absolutely. Can I tell you the other really fun part of that story now is that doctor, and he changed my life, right? It was just an instant change. And I think about that interaction so often when I see my patients in front of me, when I'm interacting with my students, right? That physician is Dr. Wolfgang Gilliar, who's the dean at Touro University, Nevada.
It's amazing. It
comes full circle. Yeah.
Amazing. It's like the universe is telling you something, right?
Yes, exactly.
And then telling you again in later years, right? Okay, so you applied to Touro at that point. Thank God your sister's okay, of course. You apply, right? You apply to Touro and you get in, obviously, and you start your journey, and you've already decided that you want to be a pediatrician. So can you tell us a little bit about, you already told us what life is like now at Touro, but just tell us what your experience was like at Touro, and then how your application process was to pediatrics.
Yeah, absolutely. When I start, so Touro has done group interviews. Also, since its inception, we've always done group interviews, which means we'll take, anywhere from 4, maybe up to 7, but typically 4 to 6 applicants all at the same time will come and interview with a panel that usually consists of a couple faculty members and a student and a current student. And I remember during my interview at Touro how impressed I was with the other applicants and how much I liked them. Like, we all actually kept in touch after the interview, which seems like a crazy thing. But then when I came to Touro, I was blown away, and I went to UCLA. So I had this giant public institution as my exemplar of what education was. And here was this small school on this little island in the Bay Area where every single person was awesome. Like, I felt like the admissions committee just handpicked all the people who would be my best friends. And I have to say, year after year, that's how I still feel that way. There's something so special about our students. And I don't know if it's the fact that our current students have a role in selecting who our next students are, or if it is that Bay Area mentality, interested in osteopathy, kind of where those two overlap. But it's pretty amazing. So I loved my fellow students here. You know, they continue to be my lifelong friends. We formed a study group, and I had never studied in a study group before, but that's really the only way I got through all of the material. We made up ridiculous mnemonics, which I still use to this day. I'll teach them to my students, and many of them are no longer even pertinent or necessary, but they're all still trapped in my brain. And then I started rotations, and my first rotation was pediatrics, and no surprise, I loved it. But then my next rotation was family medicine, and I loved that. And then internal medicine, and I loved that. And then surgery, and I really, really, really loved that. And so I ended up having it sounds like I have a lot of crises, but I had another crisis in my third year, towards the end of my third year, where I thought, oh, I love everything, right? There was a handful of rotations I didn't like, but really the majority of them I just loved. I loved being able, it is such a privilege to be able to help people in the way that we're able to help people, right? To connect with them and hear their stories and make a difference in their lives. And so it was my boyfriend at the time, who is now my husband, who said, you know, you're happy when you talk about patients. You're happiest when you talk about kids. And that was it. That was the nudge I needed. All right, I'm going full pediatrics. And so I set up most of my fourth year in pediatric rotations, different specialties in peds, and mainly in children's hospitals, because I realized that's really where I wanted to train, was in a children's hospital. And, you know, peds is fabulous. If you're into kids, it's really great. It's exciting. It's fun. It's so mentally stimulating. It's challenging. And, you know, there's bright colors and dogs and fish tanks everywhere you go. It's not like a gross, smelly adult hospital. You can tell my bias there. And so when I, decided where I wanted to apply for residency, I wanted to stay in California. And at the time, there were no osteopathic pediatric residency programs this side of like the Mississippi or something crazy like that. There just weren't any options. And so I realized that although I was so committed to osteopathic medicine, I was going to have to apply to an allopathic residency program if I wanted to stay in California. When I took my first level of the boards, I only took the COMLEX because I was so offended that people would even think that DO students would need to take some other exam to try to prove our worth, right? When we had this nationally approved exam that was based on what we learned, on our principles and practices. And then as I realized how competitive all of the residency programs in California were, and I wanted to go to a children's hospital, which is even more competitive, I realized that I probably should take a USMLE. So for COMLEX Level 2, I took clearly COMLEX Level 2, but then I also took the USMLE Step 2 without having taken Step 1 at all. And as I interviewed at residency programs, I had 2 program directors thank me for taking Step 2 so that they would have something that they could compare my scores with, with the other applicants, which I'm hoping is not something that is happening to our current students, right? I hope things have changed although I know the reality of that. We're still trying to get some of those changes. So I ended up matching into my number one choice for residency, which was Children's Hospital Los Angeles, CHLA, which was incredible. And, I showed up there and my co-residents were from Harvard and UC San Diego and these incredible schools. And they would, that's how you introduce yourself. It's kind of, who are you and where you're from? And I'd say, I'm from Touro. And they'd all say, what, where? But in the end, despite my initial imposter syndrome and feeling like, how did I possibly get in here? And I felt just as well prepared and really able to succeed in that residency program as all of my fellow residents from all of their incredible institutions. So I have a lot of gratitude for Touro, certainly.
So you're a rock star. You go to this great pediatric residency, right? How do you ultimately decide to go into academics? Did you think about going into private practice? And how is the decision picking a job?
I was never, ever, ever going to be a general pediatrician. I was going to subspecialize. And what I was going to subspecialize in kind of changed throughout my journey. Initially, I thought definitely, pediatric oncology and then pediatric endocrinology, maybe ID. Ultimately, I decided I wanted to do critical care. So I wanted to work in the PICU. So I was going to do a critical care fellowship. After residency, I decided to take a year off so I could have a kid. I could not be in training for a year, get a little breather, and then I would apply for critical care fellowship and go on for that. During that year is when I got the job here at Touro, which I applied to completely like almost as like not a lot of thought went into it, right? I thought, of course, they're not going to want me, right? I'm fresh out of residency. I don't know anything. They're not going to want me to come back and teach, but that might be kind of fun to do, right, during this year off. And I did come back and teach. And I realized that teaching, although I had that experience as a special ed teacher before, teaching was miraculously just as rewarding as patient care. The ability to help positive change happen in people's lives, the ability to connect with people. For me, those same feelings of being privileged to be able to do this and to be able to do real good, with my life. It was the same with teaching as it was with patient care. I also realized that being a general pediatrician is amazing. At this point, I've had some patients from the time they were born until now they're going away to college. It's incredible to build those relationships and really get to know families, to be able to diagnose things that nobody's ever diagnosed before, right? You're kind of the first person who gets to see it and pick it up. It's really amazing. So I kind of stumbled into academia and stumbled into realizing how much I loved it. And I am enthusiastic to a fault and a doer, right? I can't help but come up with solutions to everything I see around me. And so, here we are this many years later, and I've moved through almost every position here at Touro. Never, ever thought I would be dean. Even my first year, I remember some of my old faculty, who still some of the people who taught me are still working here, which is incredible. But some of my old faculty would stop by and say, oh, you're going to be dean one day. And I'd say, there is no way I'm going to be dean. That's ridiculous. But here we are. Sometimes you wouldn't be able to guess where life takes you.
So now just to kind of sum things up with you becoming dean, which is spectacular. And this is obviously a total stereotype. As me being a young medical student, I always think of this older, stuffy, like really scary individual that's going to call you in and beat you up or something, even though I don't think I ever got beat up by the dean. But obviously that is totally the opposite of who you are. So how did that happen? How did you become dean? How did that again, not that I'm surprised. I think it's awesome that you're their dean. That's spectacular. But how did that happen? And do you think that I just have a misconception of what the dean is supposed to be like? Or do you think that you're just totally rocking it and changing what the dean is and what the dean does?
I love that. I think those old stereotypes exist for a reason. There continues to be a decent amount of gender bias. And I think, osteopathy, or like we had, women in our very first class in AT Still school, right? So I think osteopathy has always been a little bit of a leader in terms of that, but we still see a good amount of gender bias. So there still are not a lot of women who become full professors or become, department chairs or deans, although I have just the best group of women dean friends from our retreats and everything at ACOM. It's pretty fantastic. So I do think that impression that people have, that they have for good reason, because that's how it was for the longest time. It is changing, and there is a wonderful group of us, and there's a bunch ahead of me, some of whom have been on your podcast, who helped to kind of lead the way. As I mentioned, I came into Touro and just loved it so much. And so I became vice chair of the department, and then I became an assistant dean of clinical integration. And then I became the associate dean of clinical education. And then I became the associate dean of academic affairs, which has oversight of all 4 years of the curriculum. And that's what I thought was going to be my ultimate job, right? That was my dream, is to be able to redesign medical education, which I still dream to do. I think, the model that most of us use now is just so outdated and not great for the learner and not great for the educators either. And we should blow the whole thing up and start afresh. But then COVID hit. And so COVID hit actually right as I was transitioning from being the dean of clinical education to the dean of academic affairs. And so I, on that like March 20th of 2020, suddenly overnight had to figure out how we were going to educate all of our clinical students when all of the hospitals were closing down to them and we couldn't put them out on rotations. So what kind of virtual experiences were we going to come up with to help ensure that our students got the education they needed for their rotations? And then at the same time, I was taking a lead on our preclinical side of what are we going to do with our students here on campus who suddenly need to be from home. And, throughout COVID, where everything was just changing, like the only thing you could predict was that the next day was going to be unpredictable. You just couldn't guess what you were going to have to deal with. I remember at one point, the dean at the time told me, can you come up with a backup plan for what we're going to do when everything has to be virtual, but there's no power anywhere, right? I'd get a book. I don't know what we could do, right, in that setting, but that's kind of how everything was, right? We were coming up with contingency plans on top of contingency plans because just the worst of the worst was happening. And I realized during that time that I kind of enjoyed leading through chaos, and I was kind of good at it. And so it was shortly after that our dean, who had been here for 15 years, he decided to retire. And so then I threw my hat in the ring for, all right, maybe I'll try this dean thing on and see what happens.
Amazing. Such an amazing story. And just to go back to what you said, we have had some amazing deans on the podcast. Again, you may be the best one. I don't want to we've had some amazing deans, and female deans definitely off the top of my head. I know we interviewed Barbara Ross-Lee, who's obviously a legend. And I believe, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think she was the first female dean in any medical school.
Yes, definitely the first female Black dean of any medical school. But I think you're right. I think it might have been the first female dean at all.
Amazing. And then, of course, Margaret Wilson is neck and neck. I think you are with Margaret Wilson. She's also a rock star. That
is so incredibly flattering to even put in the same category as Maggie Wilson. She's amazing.
Amazing. So for anyone listening, if you love this interview, those are some other interviews that you may enjoy as well. Tami, thank you so much for your time. I have one sort of grand finale question that we ask everybody that we have on the podcast, which is, can you give us one piece of advice that you were given from someone else that you really feel impacted you and you think about and you would like to pass on to our listeners?
Yeah, such a great question. And I really should have planned ahead for this because there's been a decent amount. I think, my favorite advice is not to compare your insides to somebody else's outsides. It's something I see so often with our students where you feel like you feel your struggles, right? So you feel like things are so hard and that you're really struggling. And as you look at everybody else, you're seeing what they're projecting to the world. You're not seeing those same struggles. And so it feels like by comparison, you're doing so much worse. Yeah. So whereas they're looking at you, right? And they're looking at your outsides and doing the exact same thing. So, the number of times that I've had different students come up to me and talk about, their struggles and feeling alone and feeling like, why am I here? Everybody else is so smart. And I say, everybody is looking at you and feeling that exact same way, right? If only we could kind of break down those barriers and talk about our struggles, all right, share our insides with each other more. I think there would be so much less of that.
That's excellent. That's awesome advice. I really love it. Tami, your school is awesome. Your story is awesome. And I can't thank you enough for spending time with us tonight.
Oh, thank you so much. I love that you're doing this podcast. As I mentioned when we first spoke, this is something that I've always dreamed of. I love seeing that you're doing it so much better than I ever could. And I'm just thrilled that you're helping our profession in this way. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tami.
This concludes our episode of Do or Do Not. Send all inquiries, comments, suggestions, and even let us know if there's someone you want us to interview to doordonotpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Do or Do Not Podcast for updates. If you enjoyed our podcast, please share it with your classmates and administration. We have plenty of more interviews lined up, and we're excited to share them with you. This is Tian Yu Shea. Thank you guys so much for listening to Do or Do Not.